guys, so the energy sector has gone up 30% in the last 3 months. We have to talk about this, you guys. With all of these headlines going on about Venezuela and Iran and the software crash and these private credit cracks. Now we are in times of geopolitical and technological uncertainty right now. And when that happens, investors, they want to move towards what's certain. And right now that is physical, real assets. So in this video, I'm going to give you guys an Energy 101 lesson to break down the sector, including the whole value chain, what drives earnings, and I'll also walk through in depth some stocks and ETFs that should be on your watch list. And if you stay till the end, I will also explain where I think the best long-term plays are in the value chain. If you're new here, my name is Alice. I am a CPA. I have my own wealth management and financial services company, and I also offer CFO services as well. Today in this video, I'm specifically focused on oil and gas. The S&P 500 sector that I'm showing up on screen here, it does also have companies that are in renewables, wind, solar, and electricity, but I'm not going to get super deep into those today because the majority of the S&P 500 energy sector is still oil and gas. Oil and gas sector is fundamentally driven by real end user demand. Say that you need to leave your house. You need gas. You need electricity and natural gas at home. Most companies that are in consumer discretionary also rely on energy, electricity. Now, war and geopolitical events can cause short-term volatility, but the long-term direction of the oil and gas industry is still dictated by the physical need of fuels, which then drive economic activity. So the global oil and gas market is huge. For that reason, the entire oil and gas industry is actually expected to grow to $10.8 trillion by 2030 at a CAGR of around 5%. When I think of oil and gas, I see a lot of parallels between oil and gas and mining. Because at the end of the day, it's an industry that starts with a company that's extracting some sort of natural resource or minerals or commodity out of the ground that our society and our economy needs. And that resource is then transported, refined, and distributed for an end user. That's basically what the mining industry is as well. In the oil and gas industry, we are extracting either crude oil, natural gas, or natural gas liquids. So in the oil and gas value chain, we start with upstream. The industry lingo for upstream is also known as exploration and production. So this is where it all starts. Upstream companies find crude oil, natural gas, and natural gas liquids in the ground, pull it out. When it comes to investing, I think the main and most important thing that we need to understand is what exactly drives earnings growth. So the economics of an upstream company are very simple. Upstream companies, revenue equals commodity price times production volume. That's it. So if a company produces 1 million barrels a day and crude oil is currently at $80 a barrel, then their daily revenue would be $80 million times 1 million barrels, or $80 million. If crude oil drops to $50, then revenue on that $1 million a barrel then drops 25% overnight with no changes to the company's costs, assuming all else equal. If there is a threat of war, which is the state that we're currently in, and that drives oil prices from $60 to $100, then revenue on that 1 million barrels will increase accordingly to $100 million. Now, if production volume drops because of resources in the field being depleted, or something like a natural disaster happening, revenue can also go down, and that's assuming that crude oil price stays the same. Now, oil and gas companies cannot control external circumstances like whether a war is going to happen or not, but they still need to protect their business, right? So in order to avoid price volatility from wiping out their entire business, E&P companies will hedge their expected production against future contracts to protect them against huge price drops. So let's say a company enters into a futures contract to deliver 1,000 barrels of crude oil at $75 in 90 days. If their break-even price for producing 1 barrel is $52, and let's say the spot price of oil suddenly drops down to $50, well, now they're losing $2 a barrel. And the company can only sell their oil at what the spot price of oil is at. That's how commodity markets work. So how companies protect themselves from the downside is to enter into futures contracts. So they are protected and hedged at $75. Mining companies do the exact same thing as well. They will hedge their production. So one of the biggest drivers that can quickly impact earnings for an upstream oil and gas company is the price of crude. Now, of course, they can do M&A to enter new territories, to access more oil reserves, and they can also build more oil rigs. But generally speaking, the biggest and most direct impact, all things else equal, is the price of crude. After upstream, we have midstream. So this is the transportation and distribution part of the value chain. After all of this crude oil and natural gas comes out of the ground, it needs to actually go somewhere. So we're talking pipelines, storage facilities, tankers. The midstream business model is very different from the upstream business model. Midstream companies don't care that much about commodity prices. In fact, their revenue and their stock isn't going to be driven as much by commodity prices. And even if it does, it's probably going to be a temporary thing. In the long term, these companies make money by charging a toll for basically moving gas through their infrastructure. And their revenue is based on throughput volume and long-term contracts. So what really drives earnings and company growth is long-term demand. It's also their ability to build new pipelines and increase their processing capacity to accommodate for new customers. So let's say Microsoft or Amazon signs a 10-year power agreement with a utility company to supply electricity for their data centers. That utility company then would sign a long-term contract, 5 to 10 years, let's say, with a midstream company like Enbridge to ensure that they have a reliable supply of natural gas. So these midstream companies are not selling to the Microsofts and the Amazons of the world directly. They have to sell the raw material to the utility company so that the utility company can actually process that raw material into electricity for the data center to use. So even if crude oil drops to $50 a barrel, Enbridge still gets paid for providing a service to their customer, which is the utility company, because they are basically selling transportation. And again, they charge based on their ability to transport natural gas, whether oil is $50 or $75. The last part of the value chain is downstream. So this is the refineries, and there's also marketing and distributing as well. Downstream companies basically take that crude oil, which is still in raw material form, and they turn it into products that you and other companies actually use. So this is gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, petrochemicals. So how they make money is that they will buy crude at the spot price, let's say it's $90 a barrel, and they will sell a refined product at $90 plus X being their refining margin. So refiners, they make money based on the spread between what they buy crude at and what they sell the refined product at. So for example, if gasoline demand suddenly becomes weak, for example, if something like COVID were to ever happen again and people stop driving their cars, if there is a new government policy that suddenly provides a huge tax credit to people for buying EVs and people stop buying gas cars and they prefer to buy EVs, or there's some sort of economic slowdown where for whatever reason, gasoline demand becomes very weak, then for these downstream companies, their margins and their revenue would go down. So that's why understanding what part of the chain that you're investing in is one of the most important decisions that you are going to make in energy investing, because each segment behaves differently under different market conditions. Now let's talk about some of the catalysts that move stocks in this industry, because energy is a very macro sensitive sector, and there are a couple of major things that we need to consider. So the first is OPEC and the IEA. So these are the two governing bodies of the global oil market. OPEC, everyone's heard of OPEC before, they basically control production from all of the major oil producing nations. So if OPEC decides to cut production, then supply drops and prices go up. When they increase production, prices go down. And then the IEA is just an agency, International Energy Agency, that monitors global energy markets, and they publish data that moves prices. The second is crude oil prices. So this is the most direct driver, again, for most upstream companies. Just like how the spot price of gold will have a direct impact on a operating gold miner, crude oil prices will impact an E&P company right away. So if oil is at 80 versus 60, that same barrel of oil that they're producing generates 33% more margin with the exact same cost structure. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz is a key watch point, and Iran continues to hold shipping hostage in the strait, which is a temporary headwind for oil supply. I would call this more of a short-term fluctuation rather than a structural one. Of course, that is assuming we're not entering prolonged 3-year conflict or something like that. But elevated crude prices for now mean that most of these upstream companies will report very strong Q1 earnings. Energy companies are very capital intensive. They must use debt to fund drilling, to build pipelines, and also refineries. And so when rates fall and their debt becomes cheaper to service, and their valuations usually tend to go up. If the Fed cuts rates this year, that would be a very meaningful tailwind to continue pushing up the entire sector. Next is artificial intelligence and data centers. So this is a new demand driver that did not exist 3 years ago. And that is the build out of AI data centers now creating a massive surge in electricity demand. Natural gas is the primary fuel that powers these data centers. And the more that these Mag 7 companies pour into their AI CapEx spending, the more electricity they will need and the more natural gas that gets consumed. This is a structural tailwind for natural gas producers that could last to up to a decade, depending on which AI thought leader you listen to. Last factor is geopolitics and global GDP. So energy demand grows roughly in line with global GDP, right? Because every country and population growth drives up energy demand. When the global economy is growing, more people need to consume electricity, more people need to consume gas, so energy demand grows. And then there's also geopolitics, like some of the headlines you've seen with Venezuela, Iran. For the most part, these things are basically outside of an oil and gas company's control. So now that we've kind of gone through the 101 and how the industry actually works, we can get into the stocks. So I'll walk you through a couple of the major players that I've picked up for each segment, what makes them interesting or different, and what to watch out for. As always, I'm here to just give you guys a framework to help you evaluate these companies yourself. Make sure you always do your own research. Let's start off with the integrated companies. So the integrated companies, earlier we talked about upstream, midstream, downstream companies. Well, an integrated company is basically a company that owns the entire value chain. These are companies like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. They have subsidiaries to explore, to produce, to transport, to refine, and to sell. That's what we call vertical integration. They're basically involved in all components. So Exxon Mobil. Exxon operates in 56 countries around the world, and they produce over 3 million liquid barrels of oil every single day. They are a low-cost upstream operator, and they have an oil field in Texas called Permian Basin, where they've been able to hit break-even prices of sub $30-something per barrel. That means that they're able to generate strong free cash flow even when oil prices are softer. And they've also been aggressively expanding their low carbon solutions business as well. Chevron, on the other hand, operates in 180 countries, and they have a very similar profile to Exxon, but they have a little bit more international exposure. And they also have significant Permian Basin exposure as well. They last year acquired a company called Hess Corporation, which now gives them access to a very valuable oil field in Guyana. And one of the biggest upsides from that acquisition is that management expects increased free cash flow of $1 billion from acquisition synergies. If we take a look at their numbers, they're pretty comparable. Very similar margins, just below 20%. Last year, ExxonMobil generated $24 billion of unlevered free cash flow, and Chevron generated $17.4 billion of unlevered free cash flow. If we look at return on invested capital here, ExxonMobil has a slight edge at 9.8% versus 6.6% of Chevron. They are both very profitable companies, with ExxonMobil pulling in $6.70 per share and Chevron pulling in $6.63 per share. ExxonMobil is currently trading at 23 times trailing earnings, and Chevron is trading at 29 times trailing earnings. The good thing about these oil and gas stocks is that most of them also pay dividends as well. So I think it's a great time overall to invest in oil and gas for both the growth potential as well as the dividend income. Now, if you are looking for more Canadian exposure, we have some great oil sand producers up here in Canada, okay? That's something that we are very well known for. Two stocks that we can take a look at are Cenovus and Suncor. Both Cenovus and Suncor are vertically integrated companies with very similar business models to Exxon and Chevron. Now, the reason why Suncor has higher EBITDA margins is that sometimes these fully vertically integrated companies, they might lean more towards one part of the value chain than another. So EBITDA margins here are not a perfect indicator of performance, but it is what it is. Now, the reason why Suncor has significantly higher EBITDA margins than the other three companies is because they're the only one of the four that exclusively use their own crude oil for refinery. So some of the bigger companies, Cenovus, Exxon, and Chevron, in addition to extracting their own oil for refinery purposes, they will also go out to the open market to buy crude oil at the spot rate. And the reason for this, at least my assumption, is that it allows the refineries to be always operating at full capacity. So Suncor here, if we just looked at the numbers, they're technically a little bit more profitable on paper. Suncor's EPS is almost double of what Cenovus reports. $3.50 EPS for Suncor versus $1.56 for Cenovus. Suncor is trading at 16 times trailing earnings, and Cenovus is trading at 15 times trailing earnings. Now, moving on to the midstream companies, the two that I'm going to talk about today are Enbridge and Kinder Morgan, which are pretty much household names. Starting with Enbridge, they are the largest pipeline company in North America. They actually transport roughly 30% of all crude oil produced in North America and 20% of natural gas consumed in the US. But the beauty with them is that most of their revenue is contract-based and fee-based, and their revenue streams include liquid pipelines. Because they own the world's largest pipeline, they currently transport $3 million of oil barrels from Western Canada down to the US Gulf Coast every single day. So their revenue streams include liquid pipelines, gas transmission, gas distribution, and they also have a very small component of revenue that is attributable to renewable power. Kinder Morgan, on the other hand, is more heavily weighted towards natural gas. In fact, more than half of their business, 65%, is towards natural gas right now. This is particularly interesting right now because AI data center demand. As more data centers come online and they sign long-term power agreements, this is where potentially Kinder Morgan's pipelines could become more valuable. So if natural gas demand were to decrease in the future for whatever reason, this business is much more exposed to the downside. So margins for midstream tend to be higher than upstream. So Enbridge last year generated $6.9 billion of unlevered cash flow, and Kinder Morgan delivered $4.3 billion of unlevered cash flow. Return on invested capital is 8.8% for Enbridge and 6.7% for Kinder Morgan. I have been a shareholder of Enbridge since 2016 or 2017, but right now they're trading at 23 times trailing PE compared to 24 times for Kinder Morgan. Enbridge is a little bit more profitable with $2.29 of EPS, whereas Kinder Morgan is $1.37. For both companies, more than 95% of their cash flows are from contracts. Next are the downstream companies, so these are the refiners, starting with VLO. VLO is the largest independent refiner in the US, and it's a pure play refinery, meaning that their earnings are directly tied to refining margins. So if gasoline and diesel prices and their margins go up, then Valero makes more money. If something bad were to happen to the EV market, which drives up the prices of gasoline, then Valero would benefit directly. Next, we have Phillips 66 PSX, which is slightly more diversified than Valero. So they have refining, but they also have some midstream and chemical businesses as well. They've also been investing in renewable fuels as well. So now looking at the numbers, for Valero and for Phillips, I changed these two forward PE because they actually had a disposition in Q4 that kind of skewed their earnings and skewed the numbers a little bit. Phillips 66 has more debt than Valero does, but they are cheaper on forward earnings because the consensus estimates are kind of pricing in this acquisition that they made last year, which is a refining company that they bought from Cenovus for $1.4 billion. So Valero is a little bit more expensive than Phillips in terms of PE. They also generate a higher return on invested capital, and they have less debt than Phillips does. They also generate more in levered free cash flow, $4.5 billion a year compared to Phillips of $3.6 billion. If picking individual stocks is overwhelming, I also want to talk about a couple of ETFs. Not all energy ETFs are created equal, so let's get into it. Start off with XOP. This is heavily upstream biased. So with XOP, you would be getting concentrated exposure to E&P companies. And when oil prices go up, XOP will go up as well. And when oil falls, XOP will fall harder. XLE is a little bit more balanced than XOP. Majority of their holdings are Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, but they're also less volatile than XOP because these integrated companies have downstream businesses that basically buffer oil price swings. So it's a good core energy holding, I would say. So XCG leans a little bit more Canadian. I think this is an interesting one right now because a lot of North American oil production actually does come from Alberta oil sands. And Canadian energy companies have actually been trading at a slight discount compared to the US peers. So if you're looking for Canadian exposure and you want an ETF, XCG is the way to go. And then the last one is VDE. So this one, Vanguard, they invest in the broader energy market and they have more holdings. They're not as biased towards upstream as XOP does. So they are more diversified across the entire value chain and they have lower fees. So this one is good for investors who want that energy exposure without taking a strong view on any particular segment. Now they all have their pros and cons. XLE is the biggest, the cheapest in terms of management fees and the most popular one, but they're also very top heavy. And with XLE, you're basically just mostly buying Exxon and Chevron anyways. VDE has a broader number of holdings, 122 compared to XLE, with a very similar expense ratio of 0.09% as opposed to XLE that has 0.08%. XOP is an equal weight ETF, meaning that you get true diversification across all of the companies in the value chain. But it's also more volatile because they hold smaller oil and gas names and they have a much higher expense ratio. Honestly, for a 0.6% expense ratio for XEG, just to get some Canadian exposure, I personally think that you'd just be better off buying one of the Canadian energy stocks. So for me, XCG would be out for that reason. And if you had to pick one out of the other three, XOP, if you want true diversification, it does come at a higher management fee cost versus if you're buying XLE or VDE, which are more skewed towards upstream big name anyways. If you want to invest in an ETF that is midstream only, one of them is called Alerian ML P ETF, which is actually more of an income investment. So they actually position themselves as a company that pays you distributions. And they're also structured as a partnership as opposed to a growth stock. Now, their expense ratio is very high. It's at 0.85% because it's an actively managed fund. Personally, for that expense ratio, I would rather just buy and invest in a midstream company directly rather than this ETF, but I thought it'd be worth mentioning in case that you are interested. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that natural gas producers and midstream companies with AI data center exposure are a good long-term play because unless this war drags on for an extended period of time and oil prices stay at $100 for a long time, natural gas has more concrete long-term demand.